Today is the fourth day of this May 1985 5-day retreat in California. Since there are so many new people here, let me say again a few words about listening to a talk like this. This is not a lecture given by an authority, transmitting or giving out information. To be stored up or interpreted or compared to what one already knows. It is a talk in which we're looking at something together. So in listening, just as in speaking, can there be complete openness? Not just to the words and the literal meaning of the words, but what these words are pointing at. To see in oneself whether what is said can be seen, to be so or not to be so. Not to believe in what is being said, but to test it out for oneself. One gets uncomfortable in the posture one is sitting in. Please change the posture, because pain can become a tremendous distraction from listening. But in changing a posture, can one do it so quietly, so attentively and caringly that one does not disturb others? Today, let us look at fear. And particularly the fear of dying. And this whole idea of death. I think it is true to say that human beings the world over, whether they live in the south or in the north, in the east or in the west, are afraid. Almost all human beings are raised with fear. And I'm not talking the cautions one has to take about poisonous plants or cars coming on. To see an oncoming car and jump out of the way is not fear, that is right action, intelligent action. Or not to touch poison oak if one has been shown what it looks like. There's no fear, one just doesn't do it. to act in a crisis, usually an enormous energy and intelligence comes into being to deal with it. And only later, when one thinks about what one has been through, may fear arise. Maybe not about the past incidents, but about this thing repeating itself, coming again. So there are a million things that we're afraid of. One can't list them all. And everybody knows the more obvious things we're afraid of. Afraid of failing, afraid of losing who or whatever we're deeply attached to. Fear of not being loved, fear of being abandoned, fear of not being as good as someone else, fear of having done wrong, which is also the fear of punishment. We'll wait a moment until people are seated. We've been talking about fear. Which is in every human being, or in almost every human being in the world over. There's fear. And listing some of these fears, we cannot list them all, they're endless. Fear of losing one's job, not coming up to standards set by oneself or others. Fear of wrongdoing or having done wrongly in the past. Fear of being found out. Fear of making a fool of oneself, or of being ridiculed or humiliated. Fear of violence, either of others or of one's own violence. And ultimately, the fear of dying, the fear of death. One looks carefully at fear, and looking carefully at fear means not immediately when fear arises, opposing it, bracing against it, or thinking I must overcome this fear, I must be courageous, or feeling ashamed of the fear or repressing it, escaping from it. If one was really intensely interested for once meeting up with fear completely, finding out what it is, seeing it face to face, as it were, one will find that almost all fears and anxieties are triggered by thinking, imagining. And this thinking and imagining is rooted in one's past memories, things that happened to one before, or that have happened to others and been told one, things that one has read, heard about, or that the mind conjures up out of a combination of all of these. So in all fear, almost all fear, there is a memory involved, maybe in all fear. There's involved thought, memory, and anticipation of what is remembered to have happened to happen again, which is also the creation of time, because one thinks of past events that may happen in the future, the mind creates this time. Imagine for a moment that there was no thought in the mind of yesterday, no memory of yesterday, and no anticipation of tomorrow based on yesterday's remembrances. Could there possibly be fear? But one thought, or something one sees which is associated with a thought, can immediately trigger fear. One may not even be conscious of it. The associative process in the brain, and the brain connecting with all the circuits throughout the body, which are connected to the glands, the organs, the muscles, immediately arouses a state of being which one feels as unpleasurable, discomforting. What the body actually is doing, if a fearful thought enters the mind or something is seen that is associated with something that has been frightening in the past, what the body does is rally it for either running, escaping, or attacking. It's an ancient response system that goes back to our animal inheritance, which is recorded, lodged in the brain. To run or to fight. Maybe this is why jogging has become so immensely popular. To run off all these accumulated juices the body pours out to do that. If one is afraid in an office, one can't run, so one feels intense discomfort, because the body knows no better but to prepare the body to prepare itself to run or fight when fear is triggered, when a frightening stimulus is recorded. Or getting angry. It's a tremendous release. I don't think one has ever looked directly at anger, just as one has rarely ever looked directly at fear. The pleasure involved in anger, we usually bemoan it, and we take all kinds of precepts or whatever against becoming angry, controlling it. But do we ever look at it, understand it, see it directly as it arises, as it unfolds, and defolds if it is seen completely? In anger, just as in running, there is a release. The body gets rid of what it has poured out for action. And then there comes the remorse, or if one remembers one's precept, one will suppress that anger, control it. But anger is not dissipated by suppression or control. It works underground in mischievous ways. And then maybe at a moment of lack of control, it explodes. And then there comes regret and remorse. And we know all the things that go with it. And at that moment, no attention. Either at the moment of anger, if there's no attention, the anger will just express itself. And then, at the moment of remorse and regret, there's no attention. There's just that habitual way of reacting. And then the fear of being angry again, or fear of other people's anger. So if some thought, whatever thought, has triggered fear or anxiety, anxiety floods the body, feeling of utter discomfort in the heart, in the stomach, in the intestines, in the muscles, the lungs, wherever, in the head. Can one be with that completely, without any shadow of opposition or bracing, attentively aware of all the habitual escapes that suggest themselves, but remaining with what is actually there, and not even calling it fear or anxiety, not calling it anything, which means not even recognizing it, saying, this is my old fear, I know, and I know it's going to get worse, and in half an hour I'm going to be a wreck. How do you know? If you think that way, you will be, because thought has tremendous power over this body. Through all of these neurological connections throughout the body. But if for once you realize that you don't know this thing, you have never looked at it, you only habitually reacted to it, for or against it. If for once one realizes that one does not know this thing, all one knows is memories, and they're old, they don't apply right now, then what is fear if I don't name it? I don't react to it, but I attend to it with the totality of one's being. Like that. Whatever. Just being there, but with awareness. Not pulling a bag over the head. With this I mean looking the other way. One may realize that fear is already the running away from something that one does not know. And to be with what one does not know frightens. brain. The brain always wants to know so it can respond, make everything secure. That is its limited function. But we are not limited to that. One really needs to find out what something is. One can't know it, because knowing is memory, and memory is very limited. Even the memory of the most meticulously remembered event is not the whole event that took place. And it is certainly not what is taking place right now. What is that? If one is experimental and curious and inquiring, wanting to find out the root of all of one's confining and limiting reactions, which are so automatic. One doesn't want to react this way, and one has already reacted this way. One has hurt oneself and others in the process. One really wants to find out about fear, about anger, about anxiety, pain, all the inner violence that is bottled up in human beings. And one must look, open it up, and attend. The mind that doesn't move, that is still and open, and doesn't know. If one verbalizes, the moment one verbalizes this to oneself, I'm faced with something I don't know, I am faced with the unknown, that in itself triggers fear again. Like fear of the dark is a conditioned response. Can one see that the fear is triggered by verbalizing to oneself one's condition? And then, if the mind is really inquiring, to put the words aside and wonder again, what is this right now? Don't let it give you peace. But wonder and sink into it. One's total being, whatever it may be. Then one may find out what has habitually been called and experienced as fear and reacted to in habitual ways, escaping or suppressing or accumulating and avalanching. It changes when there is complete witness without knowing. And it cannot possibly remain the same thing which thought creates. But you have to do this for yourself. No one can do it for you. And that is the beauty of it. One can take one's refuges and go to people whom one feels comfort with, or read scriptures or chant or do whatever. Maybe temporarily the fear is allayed, but it has not been faced. It's just been drugged. And that's what we seem to be doing more and more and more. Drug ourselves against fear, anxiety, and the inner violence that is in every human being, in almost every human being. Not remaining unacknowledged, unlooked at. either drugged with drugs, or all kinds of escapes into entertainment, religious activities, or drugged with the ideal of becoming something else, becoming courageous, or becoming nonviolent. That ideal can be very inspiring. And yet, at a crucial moment, violence flares up again. And all one's professing in nonviolence is swept away because the violence is not being faced, seen, and dissipated in the seeing. I wonder if you get an inkling of what is being said, or whether you see it clearly for yourself. Not because somebody talks about it, but because one looks within, tests it out. Coming to the fear of dying, the fear of death. What is that? What is death to one? One may remember having seen people dying, or dead people. Which is not dying oneself. Seeing somebody dead and getting used to it. One's a nurse or a doctor. Getting used to seeing people dying, being with a dying relative or friend. Is that dying oneself? Sometimes people say to me, I'm not afraid of death, I'm a nurse, I see lots of people die. Then maybe a moment when one really doesn't know who one is, whether one is anything. There's something that is unknowable, there's fear. So death for most of us, I think, is a thought, is a concept, or a memory of someone who has died. And as any other frightening thought, this thought of dying frightens the body-mind. The idea of dying. Because connected with that idea of dying is not knowing how it's going to be and what is going to happen afterwards. And as soon as thought is faced with something it cannot know, there's fear aroused. Because thought wants to think. That's all it can do, and all it knows to do is think. And death, unless one spins fantasies around it, which we amply do, is unthinkable. It is precisely the ending of thought. But thought cannot think of its own ending. It can only think. When there's the ending of thought, there is no thinking. So to try to get out of the fear of death, the discomfort of ending, thought invents all kinds of schemes in which to believe what will happen to one after death. And there are as many scenarios as there have been human beings getting together of what will happen after death. Paradise, hell, eternal hunting grounds, eternal warring grounds. This was one of the schemes of the ancient Germanic tribes. At least the male part of the tribe, who loved to combat and war each other, fight each other. And the dream of the afterlife was the battle, and then the Valkyries coming and carrying the dead soldiers someplace where they would be revived with an eternally flowing wine so that they could rejuvenate and battle again. To present for each person's own consideration and reflection and looking into all one's fantasies about what happens after death and one's investment in out of fear and hope. And as long as there's fear in a human being, this human being will grab onto something that is comforting, will buy a theory without even knowing whether it is true or not, believing in somebody else's authority, not really knowing if that person knows or not. So there is in the Eastern countries the belief in reincarnation and rebirth, where one has to ask and think through for oneself what it is that is reborn. Maybe we're jumping ahead. Maybe one should look why it is that we cling to this idea of myself. Because as long as we cling to the idea, to the image of myself as an individual entity, which is all the memories that are stored up in my brain about myself, like sort of going through a photo album, and then projecting that into the future and not wanting that to come to an end, not wanting the story of my life to end. And with this attachment to the idea, the image of self, comes the fear of ending, of the self ending. Because there's the fear of the self ending and the wanting it to continue. One attaches to theories that assure one that this self will continue after death. Why doesn't one find out what this self is and what it is that continues? If one looks deeply into oneself in a retreat such as this, or outside of retreat, it doesn't matter where. What matters is an intense interest to find out for oneself who and what one is, beyond all images. The images are fairly easy to discover and to see, but is that all that's to a human being? The images that one has built up about oneself? And sort of the memory collection of that, the files, the archives. What is it that continues? And what is it that wants to continue? There are people who say they can remember past lives. They remember it, it's memory. What continues is memory. And the projection of a future life is memory projected into the future. Do you see that? I remember one young woman once saying to me, if there's any truth to this rebirth and I'm actually reborn, I'm only interested in being reborn if I can remember me. I think she expressed very well what one feels about this. I want to remember me and what I'm attached to. And yet, if one is aware, lives aware, with discernment, not just on a narrow track, but with a lot of space for observation, one will see that these attachments of the self to people, things, theories, one's creations, one's possessions, that these attachments originate fear of losing it. Or if there is actually loss that occurs, there is tremendous sorrow and grief. Sometimes uncontrollable grief and sorrow over losing what one was totally attached to and dependent upon. And not knowing now what to do. Feeling lost and left. And then seeking either comfort or a new structure to, or a new person to cling to attach to. And we've talked during the past 3 days amply about this attachment to self-image. That it is the cause of all of our hurts. If somebody does not acknowledge us, if somebody offends us, there is deep hurt and the immediate desire to lash out, and then the regrets of having been aggressive. If you observe carefully in your daily life, you will find that whenever you're hurt or offended or insulted, it is the self-image that is hurting. Even though the pain may be palpable in the heart, we've talked about the fact that all of our thoughts and images are connected throughout the body with all the organs and tissues. So this image to which one clings for dear life is the cause of our sorrow, hurt, grief, and also pride and arrogance, being somebody better than someone else. Being somebody climbing the social ladder, becoming more and more famous, more and more powerful, more and more or better and better known. This is the self-image. Look at it. Look at it for yourself now, and when you go back to your daily life, try to examine whether this is so. The self-image which wants to climb, get more famous or more powerful, a better position, more recognition, is the very essence of separation from the rest of the people. Because the rest of the people usually envy the one who is getting ahead, or are jealous, or just feel plain left out. Also, this whole complex of flattery, being flattered, is the self-image. If somebody tells you how beautiful you are, how terrific you are, how intelligent, or how this or that, how does one feel? Doesn't one buzz all over with good feeling? And one wishes to be with that person again. That person makes one feel good. Flattery is very dangerous. Because a person who flatters one may not mean what he or she says, but try to get in good graces and get position or control. But be that as it may, let's watch when we're being flattered what happens. See it, really see it, just as one sees what happens when one is hurt. And if not every time, self-image is involved in it. And then if the flattery turns into criticism at one point, how deflated one feels, how depressed. But if one sees that this is just an image, if you really see that, not just say, well, that's my big ego, is myself. These are just words. They don't do nothing, don't do anything for one. But to see that what is heard is just an image is a tremendous relief. To see that one is identified with images, which are just images. They're not real. They're just memories, ideas. But if one doesn't see it, then one thinks one is one's image. That's what I am. And that's what I want to continue. Until death and after death. Lifetime after lifetime. You know what happens to a mind which accumulates and accumulates and accumulates memories about itself, its past pleasures, its past pains, its past hurts? It can never be fresh, can never be new, can never be here completely. It's always afraid of losing something, of ending, of dying. That thought is so deeply lodged in the human mind, this thought of death. It's just a thought, it is not a reality. Do you see that? What is dying when it is not a concept, not a thought, not an idea or a theory? And when one doesn't believe in anything, the mind divests itself of all ideas about dying. Then what is dying? in seeing the self-image and the attachment to it and the fear and trembling about it. In seeing all of that with clear awareness, can there be a dying to that without any effort? So that the mind is fresh, new, innocent, facing this instant as it is, not wanting it to be otherwise. To listen carefully, it was not said, you must die to the image. People say this to me so often. Afterwards, you say, I must, I should, I ought, die to my attachments. This is not what is being said. You can have a million intentions to sever your attachments, and this is what we do when we get energetic. We think, all right, I'll give away all my possessions. People used to come to the Zen Center and they gave everything away, the stereo, the sewing machine. And 5 years later they bought it all back. Better equipment. After all, what is money? Somebody said this to me very seriously. I'm not at this point where I can give up all of this stuff. I have never talked about giving up anything, have I? We will have to go through the tapes. But it isn't. No. Who is the giver-upper? That's the me. The me gets the idea, well, maybe if I give up everything, then I become a pure, enlightened me. Well, that's fabrication of the me, of its idea, just like any other image. If one sees the burden, the danger, the separation and division that the self-image creates, if it's really seen, it drops on its own, at least at the instant of seeing. And there's a tremendous relief and freedom and a real wholeness. And connection with everyone and everything. The word connection isn't good enough because it seems to sort of bridge the space, but there is no space, there is no in-between. When the self-image drops, there is no in-between. It's the self-image that creates the space and the gaps and the gulfs between human beings. I am this, I am an American, I am a Russian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew, I'm a Buddhist. And the gulf is created, whether one admits it or not. Because in that one thinks one is a notch better, or a notch purer, or a notch more this or that than the others. Why do we do that? Why do we seek security and safety in something that by its very nature is separating and dividing and therefore utterly dangerous to humankind? We don't see it through, we don't think it through. we stop someplace in the middle and then get a hold of our railings. Which are not really railings, we just think they are. So all this concern about dying at the end of one's life, death comes, whether we want it or not. That's the one thing that is certain for all of us. There's nothing else that's certain, but one thing is certain. We'll all die. No quibbling about it, no arguing about it. It'll come through accident, or through old age, or through sickness, through war. We're so concerned about that and what happens in the future after that. Why not? Why not die today? To all one's ideas. So that this rebirth which one craves so much takes place instantly. Seeing one's best friend, one's closest friend, newly for the first time as a human being, as what he or she actually is, not what one thinks and remembers he or she is, and oneself free of ideas who oneself is. Can't make an effort to bring this about, but it can happen to a mind that seriously inquires about who and what one is and what everything is, actually. Not in theory, not in thought, not in memory. Of course, it also happens, there's such a moment of freedom, no division, wholeness, and then the thought comes up, oh boy, I'm whole. A new image. A new image. For which one may even decorate oneself with a new outfit. It sounds funny, but we do it. And then immediately separation continues. That's what continues. Separation continues. Ideas continue. But life, as you watch it around yourself in this most beautiful spot of blooming and growing, leaves and trees and animals, whatever is the same from one moment to the next, whatever continues, nothing. Trees that were barren a few months ago, they're full of leaves now. And in a while they will drop completely. And it's only because something dies completely that there can be a new thing. An old leaf does not bemoan its death, it just drifts through the air. Finally it settles someplace. And if you look closely, there is the new bud. In our area where we live, where it's so cold in the winter, one wonders how these buds make it. They're already there in the fall. After the leaf has dropped, there is this little thing all packaged. The first warm week, and there it opens up, and it is no longer a bud. You can't say the bud became a leaf. It didn't become a leaf. Here's the leaf. To say the bud became a leaf, that's thinking. It's connecting something in thought and making a continuity out of something that is not continuous. Flower doesn't turn, an apple blossom doesn't turn into an apple. There is the apple blossom in all its beauty. And then there are wilted leaves, and then there's just a little bit of shrivel. And there's something new, a little round something. And every day if one looks at it, it's different and new. But if thought reflects upon it and puts memories together, it says, well, that blossom, that bud turned into the blossom turned into the little apple turned into the big apple. That's thought, which continues. But life is always fresh. Can one see it that way and be that way? Not cling and clutch that which is old and dusty and worn out. And so separated and isolated. We will end here for today.